My beloved soul, you went silent, and in that silence, something shifted in ways neither of us expected. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was powerful enough to echo in the spaces you once filled so effortlessly. You didn't announce your absence, you didn't explain it, you simply withdrew, and somehow, that quiet departure spoke louder than any words ever could. At first, it felt confusing, almost unsettling, like the sudden pause of a song you didn't realize you had memorized. They were used to your presence, the way you responded, the way you noticed small things, the way your energy lingered even in ordinary conversations. And then, just like that, it was gone. No messages, no reactions, no familiar warmth. Just silence. But silence has a strange way of amplifying everything that once felt normal. The little habits they overlooked, the comfort they took for granted, the attention they assumed would always be there, it all began to resurface in their mind. At random moments, your absence would make itself known. When something funny happened, they instinctively thought of sharing it with you. When something bothered them, they almost reached out, only to remember, you weren't there the same way anymore. And that realization didn't hit all at once, it came in waves, subtle but persistent, until it became impossible to ignore. You see, people rarely understand the value of consistency until it disappears. You were consistent in a way that felt natural, not forced. You showed up, you cared, you listened, and you gave your time without making it feel like a transaction. That kind of presence creates a quiet comfort, one that settles deep within someone without them even realizing it. And when that comfort is suddenly taken away, it leaves behind a void that can't be easily filled. They started to notice the difference, not just in their routine, but in their emotions. Conversations with others didn't feel the same. The depth was missing, the ease was missing, the familiarity was missing. It wasn't that they didn't have people around them, it was that no one carried your energy. No one understood the unspoken the way you did. No one mirrored their thoughts the way you naturally could. And that's when it began, the thinking. Not forced, not intentional, but constant. They thought about the last conversation you had. They replayed moments, searching for clues. Did they miss something? Did they say something wrong? Was there a sign they ignored? Questions started to build, and with no answers coming from you, their mind tried to fill in the gaps. Sometimes they convinced themselves it didn't matter. Sometimes they told themselves you'd come back. But deep down, there was a growing awareness that something had changed, and that change was affecting them more than they expected. What made it harder was the contrast. Before, your presence felt effortless. Now, your absence felt heavy. Before, they didn't have to think about you, you were just there. Now, they couldn't stop thinking about you, precisely because you weren't. That's the irony of human connection, we often don't fully see its depth until it's interrupted. And you, in your silence, weren't playing games or trying to create distance just for the sake of it. You stepped back for your own reasons, maybe to protect your energy, maybe to understand your own feelings, or maybe because you sensed something that words couldn't quite explain. But regardless of your reason, your silence created space. And in that space, their thoughts grew louder. They began to miss the smallest details. The way you responded differently from everyone else. The way you made them feel seen without needing to say it directly. The way conversations with you never felt forced or empty. Even the pauses between your words had meaning, something they only started to recognize after those pauses turned into complete silence. Time passed, but the silence didn't fade the way they thought it would. Instead, it lingered, quietly reshaping how they saw you. You were no longer just someone who was there, you became someone who mattered. Someone whose absence could be felt deeply. And that realization doesn't come easily. It takes distance. It takes silence. It takes the absence of what once felt ordinary. They may not admit it openly. They may distract themselves, keep busy, act unaffected. But the truth is, your absence planted something in their mind that continues to grow. Curiosity, confusion, maybe even a sense of longing, they all exist together, tangled in a way they can't fully explain. Because when someone who once felt constant suddenly becomes distant, it forces a kind of reflection that can't be avoided. And in that reflection, they start to see you differently, not just as someone who was present, but as someone who made an impact. So here you are, my beloved soul, silent, distant, yet somehow more present in their thoughts than ever before. You didn't chase, you didn't demand attention, you didn't try to prove your worth. You simply stepped back. And in doing so, you allowed them to feel what your presence truly meant. And now, without you saying a single word, they're thinking about you in ways they never did before. My beloved soul, and now the silence has stretched long enough to turn into something deeper than just absence. It has become a presence of its own, living quietly in their thoughts. What once felt like a temporary pause has now settled into a constant awareness of you. They don't just notice that you're gone anymore, they feel it in the way their days unfold, in the way certain moments feel incomplete, in the way their mind keeps circling back to you without permission. It's no longer about missing a conversation, it's about missing the connection that made those conversations meaningful in the first place. At times, they try to convince themselves that it's not a big deal. People come and go, they say. It happens. And maybe that's true. But not everyone leaves behind the kind of imprint you did. Not everyone becomes a thought that lingers in the quietest hours of the night, or a name that almost slips out in the middle of unrelated conversations. You became familiar in a way that felt rare, and when something rare disappears, it doesn't just fade, it echoes. They begin to notice how often your absence shows up in the smallest, most unexpected ways. A song plays, and it reminds them of something you once said. A random thought crosses their mind, and their first instinct is to share it with you, only to pause, realizing that they can't. Even silence itself reminds them of you, because your silence is different. It carries weight, meaning, and an unspoken question that they can't quite answer. And then comes the realization they try to avoid, the possibility that you chose this silence. That it wasn't accidental, not just a matter of being busy or distracted, but something intentional. That thought unsettles them more than anything else. Because if your absence is a choice, then it forces them to wonder why. Were they not enough? Did they overlook something important? Did they take your presence for granted without even realizing it? These questions don't always come with clarity. Sometimes they come as fleeting thoughts, quickly pushed away. Other times, they stay longer, demanding attention, asking to be understood. And in those moments, they find themselves revisiting everything: your words, your tone, the way you interacted, the way things slowly shifted without either of you acknowledging it out loud. But here's the truth they're slowly beginning to understand: your silence didn't just create distance, it created perspective. When you were there, everything felt natural, almost effortless. There was no need to analyze, no need to question. But now, with you gone, they're seeing things from a distance they never had before. They're recognizing the emotional space you occupied in their life, a space they didn't even realize was yours until it became empty. And emptiness has a way of teaching lessons that presence never can. It shows what mattered, what felt real, what made a difference. It highlights the contrast between what is and what used to be. And in that contrast, your value becomes impossible to ignore. They start to understand that it wasn't just about talking to you, it was about how you made them feel. Seen. Heard. Understood. Not in a loud or obvious way, but in a quiet, consistent way that built trust without effort. You didn't need grand gestures or constant reassurance. Your presence itself was enough. Now, in your absence, they're trying to recreate that feeling elsewhere. They talk to other people, engage in other conversations, surround themselves with distractions, but something always feels slightly off. Not wrong, just different. Because what you gave them wasn't easily replaceable. It wasn't something that could be copied or recreated. It was uniquely yours. And slowly, almost without realizing it, their thoughts about you begin to shift. It's no longer just confusion or curiosity, it becomes appreciation. A quiet acknowledgement of what you meant to them. They may not say it out loud, they may not even fully admit it to themselves, but deep down, they know, you mattered more than they realized. At times, they wonder if you think about them too. If your silence feels as heavy on your side as it does on theirs. If you ever pick up your phone, pause for a moment, and consider reaching out, only to stop yourself for reasons they'll never know. That uncertainty keeps you present in their mind, even in your absence. And the strange part is, your silence has given you a different kind of power, not control, not manipulation, but presence without effort. You're no longer just part of their daily routine, you've become part of their internal world. A thought. A memory. A feeling that appears without warning and stays longer than expected. They may try to move forward, and maybe they will. Life has a way of continuing, of filling spaces with new experiences and new people. But some spaces don't fully close, they just become quieter. And you, my beloved soul, have become one of those quiet spaces in their life. Not loud, not demanding, but always there in some form. And maybe one day, paths will cross again. Maybe words will be exchanged, explanations will be given, or maybe not. Maybe things will remain exactly as they are, unfinished, undefined, yet deeply felt. But regardless of what happens next, one thing has already been set in motion: you have left a mark. Not through effort, not through persistence, but through presence, and more importantly, through the absence of it. Because sometimes, the loudest impact a person can make, is when they choose to go silent. My beloved soul, and as time continues to move forward, something even more subtle begins to happen. Your silence stops feeling like an event and starts becoming a part of their emotional reality. At first, it was loud, almost disruptive, like a sudden change they couldn't ignore. But now, it has settled into something quieter, something deeper. It lives in the background of their thoughts, not always at the front, but never truly gone. And that is where your impact becomes even more powerful, because now, they are not just reacting to your absence, they are living with it. They start to adapt on the outside. Their routine looks normal again. They laugh, they talk, they go about their day as if everything is fine. To anyone else, nothing seems different. But internally, there's a shift they can't quite explain. Certain moments still feel incomplete, certain thoughts still feel unfinished. It's like reading a story that suddenly stopped in the middle. You can continue with other things, but a part of you keeps wondering how that story was supposed to end. And you, without saying anything, have become that unfinished story in their mind. They don't check their phone as often as they used to, but when they do, there's still a small part of them that wonders if your name might appear. Not with the same urgency as before, but with a quiet hope that hasn't fully disappeared. Hope doesn't always fade loudly, sometimes it just becomes softer, more patient, but still alive. There are moments when they almost forget you. Hours pass, sometimes even a whole day, where your absence doesn't feel as heavy. And just when they begin to believe that they're moving on, something small pulls them back, a memory, a phrase, a feeling they can't attach to anyone else. And suddenly, you're there again, not physically, not visibly, but emotionally present in a way that feels just as real. This is the part no one talks about, the lingering phase. The phase where someone is no longer actively hurting, but they're also not completely free. Where emotions are no longer overwhelming, but they're still quietly persistent. And in that space, you exist. They begin to understand that what they're feeling isn't just about missing you, it's about what you represented. You were a certain kind of connection, a certain kind of energy, a certain kind of understanding that didn't require too much explanation. And now that it's gone, they're not just missing you, they're missing that version of themselves that existed when you were around. Because with you, they felt different. Maybe lighter. Maybe more open. Maybe more understood. And now, without you, they're trying to find that version of themselves again, without really knowing how. They might try to replace the feeling. They might talk to new people, form new connections, explore new conversations. And some of it might even feel good, temporarily distracting. But deep down, there's a quiet comparison happening, not intentionally, not consciously, but naturally. And more often than not, those new experiences fall just a little short of what they felt with you. Not because others aren't enough, but because what you shared was specific. It had its own rhythm, its own depth, its own unspoken comfort. And things like that aren't easily recreated. At times, they question themselves for still thinking about you. Why does it still matter, they wonder. Why haven't I fully moved on? And the answer is simple, even if they don't want to accept it, you mattered. More than they acknowledged at the time. more than they allowed themselves to feel when you were actually there. And now, your absence has given them the clarity they didn't have before. They start to respect your silence in a strange way. At first, it felt confusing, even frustrating. But now, they begin to see it differently. They realize that not everyone has the strength to step back, to create distance, to choose silence over something that may have felt comfortable but unclear. Your silence, whether intentional or not, now feels like a boundary, something that carries its own kind of meaning. And that realization changes how they see you. You're no longer just someone who disappeared. You're someone who left an impact strong enough to be felt long after you stopped showing up. Someone who didn't need constant presence to be remembered. Someone whose absence speaks just as loudly as their presence once did. There are nights when your memory feels closer than usual. When everything is quiet, when distractions fade, when thoughts become clearer, and somehow, you find your way back into their mind. Not in a painful way, not in a way that breaks them, but in a way that makes them pause. Reflect. Feel. They might smile at certain memories. They might shake their head at things they didn't understand back then. They might even wish, just for a moment, that things had unfolded differently. But those thoughts don't come with desperation anymore, they come with acceptance slowly taking its place. Because time doesn't just heal, it also reveals. It shows what was real, what was temporary, what was meaningful. And you, my beloved soul, fall into that rare category of something meaningful. Something that didn't need a clear ending to be significant. Something that didn't need constant communication to leave a lasting impression. And maybe, just maybe, that's the reason they can't fully let go. Not because they're stuck, not because they're weak, but because some connections don't ask to be forgotten. They simply become a part of who you are, quietly shaping your thoughts, your emotions, your understanding of what it means to truly connect with someone. So even now, in this silence that has stretched far beyond what either of you expected, you are still there, in their thoughts, in their reflections, in the quiet corners of their mind where only the most meaningful memories stay. You didn't chase them. You didn't try to hold on forcefully. You simply stepped back, and in doing so, you gave them something far more powerful than constant presence. You gave them something to feel, even in your absence. My beloved soul, and as even more time quietly unfolds, something almost unexpected begins to take shape within them, a calm understanding, not loud, not dramatic, but steady and real. Your absence is no longer something they fight against, nor something they constantly question. Instead, it becomes something they carry, gently, like a memory that no longer hurts the same way but still holds meaning. They don't try to figure you out as much anymore. The endless questions that once filled their mind, why did you go silent, what changed, what did it all mean, they begin to lose their urgency. Not because the answers suddenly appeared, but because they've started to accept that not everything in life comes with closure. Some people walk into your life, change something within you, and leave without explaining how or why. And somehow, that has to be enough. But even in this acceptance, your presence hasn't disappeared. It has simply transformed. Now, instead of thinking about you with confusion, they think about you with depth. There's a quiet respect in the way they remember you. A softness in the way your name exists in their mind. You're no longer a question, they've turned you into a meaning. A chapter that didn't need a perfect ending to still be important. They begin to see how much they've changed because of you. Not in obvious ways that others would notice, but internally. The way they understand connection now is different. The way they value consistency, emotional presence, and genuine understanding, it all carries a deeper weight. You showed them something without trying to teach it. And even in your silence, that lesson stayed. There are moments when they almost thank you in their thoughts. Not for leaving, not for the silence itself, but for what that silence revealed. It made them more aware. More honest with their own emotions. It made them realize how deeply they can feel, even when they try not to. And that kind of realization changes a person. At times, they wonder what would happen if you suddenly came back. Not in a desperate, longing way, but in a curious, almost peaceful way. Would things feel the same? Would the connection still exist the way it once did? Or has time reshaped both of you into different versions of yourselves? They don't have the answers, and for the first time, they're okay with not knowing. Because now, their peace doesn't depend on your presence. And that is where everything shifts. You are no longer a need, you are a memory with meaning. And that doesn't make you less important. If anything, it makes what you shared even more real. Because it existed without conditions, without force, without needing to be held onto tightly. It simply was, and that was enough to leave a mark. They've stopped checking for you, but they haven't erased you. They've stopped expecting you, but they haven't forgotten you. And in this quiet balance, something beautiful exists, something rare. A connection that didn't turn into resentment, didn't end in chaos, didn't fade into nothingness. It just settled into something soft, something unspoken, something that still matters without needing attention. Sometimes, they sit with their thoughts and realize that not every meaningful connection is meant to last forever in a physical sense. Some are meant to stay as experiences, moments that shape you, people who shift something inside you, and then become a part of your story rather than your present. And you, my beloved soul, have become exactly that. A story they carry. A feeling they understand. A silence they no longer fear. There's no bitterness when they think of you now. No heaviness that pulls them down. Just a quiet acknowledgement that you were real, that what you shared was real, and that even though it didn't continue, it still mattered. And maybe that's the most genuine form of connection there is, the kind that doesn't need constant presence to prove its worth. If your paths never cross again, you will still exist within them in a way that no one else can replace. Not as someone they're waiting for, not as someone they're holding on to, but as someone who once understood them in a way that felt rare and honest. And if life ever brings you back into their world, it won't be out of desperation or unfinished confusion. It will be from a place of clarity, of growth, of two people who have already felt the depth of what was, and can now decide what could be, without pressure, without expectation. Until then, your silence remains what it has quietly become, a space where they found parts of themselves they didn't know existed. So even now, after everything, after all the thoughts, all the feelings, all the quiet realizations, one truth remains unchanged. You went silent, my beloved soul, but you were never truly gone, that my beloved soul, and now we arrive at the part where everything finally settles, not into an ending filled with noise or dramatic closure, but into a quiet understanding that feels almost sacred. This is where the story no longer asks questions, no longer searches for meaning, no longer waits for something to happen. This is where everything simply is. And in that stillness, something profound reveals itself. Not every connection is meant to be held onto, but some are meant to be carried within you, gently, forever. By now, they don't look for you in the same way anymore. Your name doesn't light up their screen, and it no longer sends a sudden rush through their heart. But that doesn't mean you've disappeared. You exist in a different way now, quieter, softer, deeper. You've become a part of their emotional memory, something that doesn't demand attention but still holds significance. And maybe that's the purest form of presence, to exist without needing to be seen. They've made peace with the silence. Not because they got all the answers, but because they no longer need them. They've understood something that many people spend years trying to figure out: closure doesn't always come from conversations, explanations, or final words. Sometimes, closure comes from within, from accepting that what happened was real, that what was felt was genuine, and that not everything is meant to last forever to be meaningful. And you, my beloved soul, were meaningful. Not because you stayed, not because you promised anything, but because you showed up in a way that touched something real inside them. You didn't force your place in their life, you didn't demand importance, you simply became important, naturally, quietly. And that kind of impact doesn't disappear just because time has passed. Now, when they think of you, it doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels calm. There's a certain warmth in those thoughts, like remembering a beautiful moment that has already lived its time. There's no urge to go back, no need to fix anything, no desire to change how things ended. Because deep down, they've realized, nothing was actually broken. It was just, complete in its own way. Not every story is meant to stretch into forever. Some are meant to be short, but deep. Some are meant to arrive unexpectedly, change something within you, and leave just as quietly. And that doesn't make them any less valuable. In fact, sometimes it makes them even more special. You were one of those rare moments in their life. A presence that didn't stay long enough to become ordinary. A connection that didn't last long enough to lose its depth. A silence that didn't destroy anything, but instead revealed everything. They've grown since then. In ways you may never see, in ways you may never fully understand. They've learned to appreciate people more, to express feelings more honestly, to recognize the difference between surface-level connections and something deeper. And all of that, in some quiet way, traces back to you. You didn't just leave an impression, you left a shift. And even though life has moved forward, even though new people, new moments, new experiences have filled their days, there's still a small, untouched part of them where your memory rests. Not as a burden, not as something unfinished, but as something meaningful. They don't talk about you. They don't bring you up in conversations. But sometimes, in the quietest moments, when the world slows down and their thoughts wander freely, you're there. Not loudly, not painfully, just there. Like a soft echo of something that once mattered deeply. And maybe, somewhere in your own world, you've moved on too. Maybe your silence wasn't just distance, but a step toward your own growth, your own understanding, your own journey. Maybe you found new connections, new meanings, new versions of yourself. And that's okay. Because what you shared didn't need to last forever to be real. It didn't need constant communication to be valid. It didn't need a perfect ending to be complete. Some connections are not meant to be continued, they are meant to be remembered. And you, my beloved soul, will be remembered. Not with longing, not with regret, but with a quiet respect for what was. For the way you came into their life without warning. For the way you stayed just long enough to matter. For the way you left without chaos, but with meaning. And most of all, for the way your silence taught them something they could never learn from words, that sometimes, the deepest connections are the ones that don't need to last forever, they just need to be real while they exist. So this is not a goodbye filled with sadness. This is not an ending filled with loss. This is simply an acknowledgement of something beautiful that happened, something real that was felt, and something meaningful that will always remain, even in silence. You went silent, my beloved soul, and in that silence, you became unforgettable.